a very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So I hope all of you have enjoyed your Diwali break a lot. So let's come back to studies again, and after the much needed rejuvenation that you've all got because of Diwali, you all have to again proceed studying very seriously for your exams. So today we'll be covering the newspapers of Friday and Monday. So I'm considering the holiday for Diwali. So today we'll be covering for newspapers of Friday and Monday, that is today. So let's start with the topics. And the first topic is related to the right to work. So right to work, what is its position in India and whether that is very relevant for us right now. So this whole article was about a discussion on that. So because the right to work, is it a constitutional right or a statutory right? So it all comes under your GS syllabus 2, that is polity. So basically this article started with an introduction, or this thing you can also follow in your mains answer writing, wherein in the introduction you are mentioning about the origin or the source of the right to work. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in that the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, they mention about the right to work. So right to work has been mentioned even in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which means it is that important. So with this introduction, you can start any answer on the right to work, whether it should be considered in India or not. So the next thing this article covered was about the position in India, whether it is a constitutional right or a statutory right. As of now, it is not a constitutional right because it is nowhere mentioned in the constitution or in the fundamental rights that the right to work is a fundamental right and everybody should be given the right to work. So that is not mentioned in the constitution. However, we do have directive principles which says that the states must take steps to ensure that in the jobs the people get dignified wages and decent standards of living and working conditions and all that. But however, it is not a constitutional right as of now in India. So is it a statutory right? Yes, in a way, because we have legislations like Manrega. So these legislations provide that people who apply for job under MGNREGA will have to be given jobs within a matter of 15 days, and within 15 days if the jobs are not provided to the person who has applied for the job under MGNREGA, then that person will have to be given unemployment allowance. So therefore it is a statutory right. Under the statute of MGNREGA, a person gets the right to work. But however, it is just a statutory right. If tomorrow MGNREGA as a legislation is annulled, if it ceases to exist, then this right of the right to work under this legislation will also cease to exist. So this is the current position in India, where the right to job is just a statutory right under some legislations like MGNREGA, but it is not a constitutional right. The third thing let's look at is the relevance. Why is it important in a country like India to have something like the right to work? So now first let's understand the relevance. The first important thing is the jobless growth. So even the other day I was telling about how there was a question in the mains examination that what is jobless growth and what has led to the jobless growth. It is often said that the LPG reforms have actually led to jobless growth because India as a country has invested more in capital and technology intensive industries rather than in the labor intensive industries. So therefore our industrialization has been more capital dominated and technology dominated, which don't produce enough jobs. So our investments in the labor intensive sectors have been less. So this is why there has been a jobless growth. Now, because there is a jobless growth, it's very important for us to create more jobs in the coming years. We also spoke about how the middle level, that is the industries, have not been able to provide a lot of jobs to the aspiring youth. So there is that missing middle in India that even the economic survey has spoken about. So it is this jobless growth that makes it all the more important for us to ensure that there is a right to work for the people. The second is the displacement. So displacement is that people who were traditionally working in some of the sectors have also been displaced because of the emergence of new technologies and new industries which have been more disruptive, and people have been displaced out of the jobs in their conventional sectors. So this is the second reason why we have to consider the right to work more seriously in India. The third is a job creation. Now, job creation in India has been very slow compared to what it should have actually been. So the number of youth, we know that India is now in a demographic bulge where the average age of the entire population is around 27 years. So that means to say there is a youth bulge in the entire country. So that is what we call as a demographic dividend. If this demographic dividend needs to be harnessed and it has to be capitalized for the growth and development of India, then we have to create a lot of employment opportunities for the aspiring youth who should be able to contribute towards the national development. For this, job creation is very, very important, and that will be taken seriously only when we have something like the right to work, where it is the obligation on part of the government to create jobs for each and every person who is aspiring to work. So this is the third reason why we must have a right to work. The fourth is the abundance. Of course, India is a labor abundant country. So we have been known traditionally for our cheap labor, and which has in fact attracted a lot of investments and industries into India. That is because we are labor abundant, we have highly skilled labor also, and also at a cheaper rates. So this abundance and the fact that we are labor abundant country is makes it all the more important for us to come out with the right to work. The next is the automation. So now we know how disruptive technologies are now coming up, be it automation or artificial intelligence. So all of these are definitely going to lead to what is called as a constructive destruction of jobs. So there is going to be a destruction of jobs. So this is going to create a lot of void, and many of the people who are even employed currently may become unemployed tomorrow because of the disruptive changes in the technologies that are taking place. So this is yet another reason why we must think seriously about the right to work. So this explains the relevance of the right to work, and as far as the situation in India is concerned. Next, we shall see the solution or the way forward on how we can come forward and create an atmosphere where right to work can actually become a possibility. The first concept is a DUET concept, which is nothing but a decentralized urban employment and training. So it is talking about creating more urban employment, and that too in a decentralized manner. So this has to ensure the dignity of the people who is employed, and this dignity comes from providing decent wage to the worker by ensuring the conditions of working are more adaptable and they are more healthy and hygienic, and also the social value. Whenever somebody is employed or somebody is engaged in the job of, say, building a school or building a park, then that person associates a lot of social value with it, that he is contributing to the building of something that's really very important. So that social value, the working conditions and a decent wage, all of this contribute towards the dignity of the employment, and this is what has to be ensured through DUET, which is decentralized urban employment and training. So in this DUET concept, as the name itself says, it is decentralized urban employment and training. So the role of the urban local bodies become very important. So what these urban local bodies can do is they can come out with what are called as job vouchers. These job vouchers can be given to some of the public institutions, be it schools or hospitals or whatever it is. So these public institutions, with the help of these job vouchers, can then hire labor for, let's say if it is a school, it could be for repairing, maintenance of the school, or painting the school building, or whatever it be. So these urban local bodies can give job vouchers to the public institutions like school, and these public institutions can then use these job vouchers to hire labor. So like this, it is going to happen in a decentralized manner, where every institution, depending upon its requirements, is going to hire the labor for its work in a very decentralized manner based on the job vouchers given by the urban local bodies. So this is one thing that can be done. And this is a very interesting concept also because it is completely decentralized and will therefore meet all the requirements of these public institutions who have something to offer in terms of jobs and employment. And the next thing that should be done is a vacancy in the government jobs. So be it the nurses, or be it the ASHA workers, be it other kinds of caregivers. There are a lot of vacancies in these kinds of sectors in the government sector. So what this article is also trying to tell is, now that we are talking about providing a right to work and creating more employment opportunities, we must not forget that there are already a lot of vacant posts in the already created posts. So these vacancies must be filled, so that in turn can offer a lot of opportunities for the people, because these are the posts that have already been created but are still vacant. So this can consume and absorb a lot of people. So this is another thing that we must do when we are talking about the right to work. So that is it about this topic. Now let's move on to the next topic. This is about immunization, and immunization is a part of your GS paper too. So previously, just I think 1 or 2 weeks before, also we covered the topic of immunization, where we saw what is the coverage of immunization in India, and we also took up a detailed question about the analysis of the immunization program in India, how well and how good it is working. So what this whole article is again telling about is it's kind of a report card on how India is performed in various immunization programs. So this is a report by the International Vaccine Access Center. So this report has spoken about how India has performed in as far as covering or providing the vaccination coverage to the target beneficiaries. So this report covers India's performance on basically 5 vaccines. So what has been the coverage that is achieved in these 5 vaccines in India is what is being reported under this report by the International Vaccine Access Center. So this report says that in 3 out of these 5 vaccines which this report covers, India has gotten 90% coverage, which is very good. So 90% coverage for 3 out of these 5 vaccines has already happened in India, which is a good progress. But however, the report also highlights some of the issues related to the lack of good coverage in certain vaccines. For example, the rotavirus vaccine. So in 2018, the coverage was 35%. And in 2019, it was 53%. Though you can see that the overall coverage is less, it is not as much as 90% in comparison to the other 3 vaccines. But this 53% is still a low coverage for the rotavirus vaccine. So this is one issue that this report is pointing out. But however, the positive thing that we see here is, in 2018, it was just 35%, and in just a matter of 1 year, the coverage is improved to 58%, which is 53%, which is really good. So this rate of progress, or the rate of coverage, has improved a lot, which is good. But however, the point is that only 53% of the children are covered under the rotavirus vaccine. So which means that we need to expand the coverage of this vaccine to more and more number of children. So in the case of diarrhea, again, just 51% of the children are receiving the oral rehydration solution, and just 20% of the children are receiving zinc supplements to deal with diarrhea. So these are the important progress or data about the coverage, the vaccination or the immunization coverage in India that this report is talking about. So you can use this data on any question that is talking about the immunization program in India and how far it is being successful and what needs to be done. So upon this, now that the COVID-19 vaccine is also being, trials are going on everywhere across the world. So vaccination and immunization as a topic may become very important, and therefore this data can be used in all those answers. Now let's move on to the next. So this topic is about the intercaste marriages. So intercaste marriages again is a part of your society, which will be a part of your GS1 syllabus, or it can also come under your GS2, that again talks about the issues related to the law and order also, and also about the general welfare of the people. So in such cases also these issues might come up, and it can also form a good part of your GS4 ethics syllabus, because there are several ethical issues which are associated with opposition to the intercaste marriages. So this article, it begins by talking about the B.R. Ambedkar's viewpoint on intercaste marriages. So B.R. Ambedkar was always advocating of the intercaste marriages. He said that intercaste marriages need to be promoted because that is going to tackle the inequalities in the country, that is going to tackle the untouchability in the country. So this evil of untouchability is there between different castes. But once the intercaste marriages are promoted and they start happening on a large scale, it will blur these lines between the castes, and therefore it has the potential to uproot the evil of untouchability from India. So it is also going to promote what is the spirit of equality, fraternity and brotherhood, which is liberty, equality, fraternity, that the preamble also enshrines. So that also is going to be upheld by these intercaste marriages. This is what B.R. Ambedkar's views was. So if you have this topic, you can start with B.R. Ambedkar's views about how this has the potential to blur the caste lines and uproot the issue or the problem of untouchability and truly uphold the values of our constitution and preamble, which talk about the equality, liberty and fraternity. There are, however, several issues that are associated with the intercaste marriages in India. The first thing is vigilante justice. So there have been several such organizations that often deal with opposition to the intercaste marriages. So this editorial quotes one, which is Babu Bajrangi, who was recently arrested, convicted for the murder that happened way back in 2002. So he even ran a trust called as the Navchetan Trust, which was all about protecting the girls who from marriages which would lead them to conversion of their religion. So like that, there are several such vigilante groups which oppose such intercaste marriages, and they even resort to violence and intimidation, threatening people that they should not marry, intercaste marriages should not happen. So they force people, they threaten them, they intimidate them, and they show violence upon the people to stop intercaste marriages from happening. So this is a very crucial issue which is to be dealt with if we really have to promote the intercaste marriages. The second issue is the role of the police. There have been several instances where these vigilante groups have exhibited violence in dealing with couples who belong to two different castes. So many times the couples have also been murdered or intimidated and violence shown upon them. But in spite of all that, in many of the instances, the role of police is seen to be wanting. So police are not acting against these groups enough as much as they should have acted to tackle these groups and to give protection to the couples who want to marry belonging to different castes. So the protection that the police should have offered and the heavy hand with which they should have dealt with these vigilante groups is not seen in many of the instances. So this is where that role of the police is missing, which is again another issue. The third is about the woman's position in the society. So every time you must have heard also about the Hadia's case. So she was basically Akhila, and then she converted to Islam because she wanted to marry a person from the Muslim community, and then she converted into Islam and she changed her name to Hadia. So this was questioned in the court by her parents, and there was a lot of opposition to this marriage. So this again basically boils down to the independence that the women enjoy in India about their decision making. So how often the decision taken by women to marry a person from another caste is equated to the honor of the family, to the honor of the community, and this leads to what is called as the honor killing, because some community's honor is at stake because a woman chose to marry someone who she shouldn't have married. So this also speaks volumes about the woman's position in the society, in a patriarchal society where the decision of the woman is not always appreciated, and her independent position to make her own choices is not appreciated. So her independent choice about her life partner is always questioned, that it is leading to the dishonor of the family, or it is putting the honor of the community at stake. So therefore this whole issue again speaks volumes about the position of women in our society. And the last is about the constitutional spirit. Our constitution provides complete freedom to the people, to consenting adults who want to get married to each other. It is up to their choice. So there is nothing in the constitution that bars people or consenting adults from marrying each other. So our constitutional spirit is always supported or promoted equality and fraternity, and it in fact promotes such a spirit of equality and brotherhood among different communities and castes. But however, these issues which are against the intercaste marriages is therefore against the spirit of our constitution itself. So these are the various issues when we talk about the intercaste marriages or the problem of honor killing in India, or the what is that, the love jihad about which we spoke the other day. So all of these are several issues which are associated with this topic. So this is it about this. Now we move on to the next topic. Now this topic is about Atmanirbhar Bharat. So this can be a part of your GS3 syllabus. So now Atmanirbhar Bharat, we have spoken several times before in the ICANN videos, and the reason why we're talking about this now is because the third installment of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative package has been announced by our finance minister. So let's see what this package spoke about, and because you have to know about Atmanirbhar Bharat, you may have a broad question that what do you understand by Atmanirbhar Bharat and what measures are being taken by the government to ensure the same. So in which case you must broadly know what have been covered in the previous instances of Atmanirbhar Bharat and in the current one. So we have already covered the first and the second installment of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So in this we will just strictly be discussing what was announced in the third installment. You also have to understand some of the focus areas so that even if a broader question is asked, you will be able to answer that these are the things that we have to ensure if we want to become self-reliant or Atmanirbhar. So in this third installment, the focus areas have been, one is the job creation. So the job creation, we even spoke in our first article about the creation of jobs in the country, how it should be done. So for this, the government has said that the Employee Provident Fund contribution, the government will pay that contribution for 2 years. So on behalf of the firms, the government is going to pay the EPF contribution for 2 years. So this will again ensure that more jobs are created. And the focus is also on formalization. So now we know that more than 90% of the employment in India is in the informal sector. So in the informal sector, there is lack of protection to the workers. There is no social security. There is no guarantee of the job. They can be fired anytime. So all of these issues are there. The workers suffer from several occupational hazards as well. Even in such cases, they lack social protection. So therefore, we need to formalize our economy more so that on the one hand, even the businesses can grow big, so that there is economies of scale, and on the other, even the workers can get protection, basically the social security protection, so that even they are not exploited and harassed by the management of the firms. So therefore, formalization is one more thing which can create a lot of jobs, because that will make the firms grow bigger and bigger. So this is one more focus area by the government. The third is to create more rural employment. So urban areas are getting a lot congested, and rural areas we have to create more employment opportunities. So for this, government has announced 65,000 crores of subsidy. Fertilizer subsidy has now been announced by the government. And also under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, 20,000 crore rupees has been kept aside for Garib Kalyan Yojana. So this is what the government is now planning to do for generating the rural employment. Next focus area is a credit flow. So again, credit flow is very important in the country when we are looking for creation of more infrastructure, and we are looking for more investments to come in the country, which acts as engines of growth. So therefore, credit flow is extremely important. For this, the government is going to do a 6,000 crore equity infusion in the National Infrastructure and Investment Fund. So this again will help India to create better infrastructure and thereby attract more investments into various sectors in India. So such investments and bettering our infrastructure is only going to create more employment opportunities and going to absorb more people in the jobs. Next is domestic manufacturing. Of course, we have again recently discussed about the production linked incentive scheme that the government has launched for 10 more sectors in order to boost the domestic manufacturing, which again is for Atmanirbhar Bharat and for Make in India. It is going to boost our exports. It is going to create more jobs in the country. It is going to make our exports more competitive with the international market. It is also going to help us come out with the technologically upgraded manufacturing. So all of these advantages we just read the day before. So domestic manufacturing is also one focus area under this package. And the last is about the real estate. So real estate is one sector which after agriculture is generating the largest number of employment opportunities. But because of the COVID pandemic, the real estate as a sector has slowed down, and the government now wants to revive it. So in this, the government has now just announced that income tax relief is going to be given to people who are buying residential housing units which are worth totally less than 2 crores. So for such people, income tax relief will be given. So these are some of the initiatives or the packages that the government has announced, and broadly these are the 6 important focus areas that the government has focused in its third and final package of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So you must be able to now as a whole understand what the focus of the government has been and how it is going to make India more self-reliant in all the 3 packages. So this is going to give you a broader overview of how we are proceeding towards that. So any broad question on Atmanirbhar Bharat and how we should attain that, so you must be able to talk about all these focus areas and say that these are all the ingredients towards which we should work if you want to be self-reliant and Atmanirbhar. Now let's move on to the next topic. This topic is about the Regional Comprehensive and Economic Partnership. This is a mega trade bloc, which is a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that has now been struck finally between the countries of ASEAN, which are 10 in number, and then between China, Japan, South Korea and Australia. So the 10 ASEAN countries plus these 4 countries of China, Japan, South Korea and Australia together have struck the RCEP deal. So RCEP is a mega trade bloc. It's kind of a free trade agreement between all of these countries, where they are going to lower the tariff and non-tariff barriers for each other so that the trade in the region as a whole is going to boost. So the importance of this bloc is that it contributes to nearly 30% of the GDP of the world. So the ASEAN countries plus the 4 countries together contribute to 30% of the world's GDP. So that is a very huge potential for the RCEP as a whole group. So it is kind of become the largest free trade agreement ever that has been struck, because these countries' overall GDP contribute to nearly 30% of the global GDP. And also it is going to boost the commerce and trade in trade and services in the Asia Pacific region. It is going to boost commerce. So these are all the important things why RCEP has now become very important. In fact, the negotiations of RCEP began long before, and India was also trying to negotiate whether it should become a member of RCEP or not. But finally, India felt that if India becomes a member of RCEP, then the Chinese imports are going to flood into India, and India's domestic manufacturing capacity or the industry is going to be hurt because of extremely cheap Chinese imports, which will flood the Indian markets. And also India had several issues related to the micro and small industries, related to the e-commerce, related to the agreement on services, that how India wanted India's service exports to be more liberal in these countries, which was not happening. So because of various concerns that India had with respect to RCEP, that it would hurt India more than benefiting it, so India withdrew from negotiations, and therefore India is not a part of RCEP. So now these countries have struck the RCEP deal finally, and they have said that if India wants to enter into RCEP now, then it will have to renegotiate with us again. So let's broadly look at what RCEP talks about. It talks about the trade in goods and services. It talks about intellectual property. It talks about e-commerce, telecommunications, and micro and small and medium enterprises. So these are some of the areas with which the RCEP is dealing with. So India had opposition even on the intellectual property regime. So where these countries wanted a stricter regime, India always wanted to protect, to see that public interest more, and then come to the intellectual property. So these are the important focus areas in the RCEP. So next, let's look at some of the concerns that now that the RCEP has actually now come into existence, and the other countries, ASEAN plus 4 other countries, have finally struck this deal of RCEP. So now there are three major concerns that this article is talking about. First is, this is not a good step. This is not a good thing for India, that this RCEP deal has been struck at a time when India has so much of tensions with China. So India already has a lot of tension with China in the Ladakh and the Galwan Valley. So there is a lot of border tensions that are going on between the two countries, which is yet to be resolved, and talks are happening, but the resolution is not seen the light of the day. So at this point of time, RCEP, because one of the major countries in the RCEP is China, and India was very apprehensive about RCEP as a whole only because of China, that Chinese imports are going to flood India. So in such a context, in such a backdrop, if RCEP has now finally materialized at a time when India has a lot of tension with China, is not a very good thing for India, because now India already has tensions with China, and RCEP is also kind of dominated by China itself because of China's economic clout. So this is not a good thing for India. Second is the Indo-Pacific. So these ASEAN countries plus the 4 countries of China, Japan, South Korea and Australia, if the RCEP is going to liberalize trade and commerce between these countries, and is going to boost the trade and commerce of goods as well as services between these countries, it is going to give a boost to the Asia Pacific region. But one thing to remember is that India has just now invited Australia for the Malabar exercise. So, and also the Quad talks have happened between the 4 countries now. So at a time when India is talking about Indo-Pacific, this RCEP got signed. In fact, in the Quad and in the Indo-Pacific, whatever is happening, the 2 countries, which is Japan and Australia. Now, Japan and Australia are a part of Quad because they are very apprehensive of Chinese intentions in the region. But that did not stop these 2 countries from being a part of RCEP, of which China is a very dominant player. So which means that these countries are also just thinking about their own national interests, that yes, they are part of the Quad because they are apprehensive about the Chinese intentions in the region. But at the same time, when it comes to the economy, it is important to boost their economies as well, and for which they won't hesitate to cooperate with China in a deal like RCEP. So this should be a concern for India, that on the one hand, these countries are signing and are a part of the Quad, but on the other hand, in some other initiative, they are very much collaborating and cooperating with China. So this is one cause of concern. And the last is the leverage for China. Now, the signing of the RCEP is going to be a huge leverage for China, because Chinese economy can grow much more stronger, its exports can grow much more stronger, and it will have access to the Japanese, South Korean markets, which is going to have a very good benefits for China. So this whole thing will be beneficial to China a lot, and already China is economically extremely strong, and in the future this can pave the way for China in becoming an economic powerhouse. And also it shows that while it is very easy for the countries to talk about economic decoupling from China, but it is very difficult for that to happen. And this RCEP shows precisely that. So those countries like Japan and Australia, which are actually against China on many respects, are participating in this deal with China. And this shows how difficult the talks about economic decoupling from China is, and it may not be practical because China is so strong economically in trade and commerce wise that it is very difficult for various countries to completely dealing from China. So this again improves the leverage that China has in the Asia Pacific region. These are the important concerns for India with the recent signing of the RCEP, or the recent conclusion of the RCEP negotiations and the formation of RCEP. So now let's move on to the next topic. Now this topic is about the tribal issues, which is a part of your GS2 syllabus. So this article was about the forest right claims of 1,200 tribals that were rejected, and this happened in Karnataka. So This article says that, first of all, the Forest Rights Act was enacted in 2006, which gave rights to these traditional forest dwellers over some of the individual assets or the community resources as well. It also allows them to reside in the forest if that is they have been doing so traditionally. But however, to prove that they are the inhabitants of the forest, they have to submit evidence in the form of various documents. So, what this whole article is trying to tell us now that the claims of 1,200 tribals in Karnataka has been rejected because they could not produce the documents or the evidence which is required to prove that they have actually been residing in the forest for many years. So it is saying that in a country where the tradition of maintaining the documents and submission of the documents, the proper documentation process itself has started very lately, how can we expect the tribals who have been inhabiting the forest and who are relatively backward to maintain the documents and evidence that they are in fact residents of the forest, inhabitants of the forest for many years? So how can we expect the tribals, after all, to maintain these documents and evidence? So that is what is a concern, that it is because of the absence of this documentation that the forest right claims of the tribals have been rejected. And also, if you look at the grounds for the rejection, mostly the tribals' claims are rejected, saying that their areas they form a part of a protected area like a national park or something. But however, what this article also says this, even if these tribals are occupying a national park or a core area in the national park, then it's important to recognize that yes, they actually are entitled to, but then of course they cannot be given the land in the core area of a tiger reserve or a national park, in which case they will at least be resettled elsewhere, they will be rehabilitated elsewhere. So while rejecting the claims, it is important to first of all acknowledge that yes, these tribals were residing, but the problem was that they were residing in the core area of a national park in which they cannot obviously stay, so they need to be resettled. But what is being done is their claim itself is being outrightly rejected, rather than acknowledging the fact that they need to be resettled or rehabilitated because they were residing in a core area of a forest. So this is one more issue with respect to this. So whenever you're writing any answer on the tribal issues and what problems they face, etc. So one of the problems definitely is the resettlement or the displacement of the tribals because of various developmental projects or something that is in contravention with the environment and wildlife protection. So these are some of the issues when we talk about the tribals. So you can use this as an example to say how the tribals in Karnataka were displaced by rejecting their claims because they did not have the documentation to prove. So that is about this topic. Now let's move on to the next topic. Now this is about the pollution. So pollution is now making a lot of news because in North India it is a time when the stubble burning happens. It's a time when the Diwali crackers are bursted, and it's also the time where during winter the pollution as a problem becomes very severe in Northern India, especially in the capital, in the NCR. So pollution, of course, is a part of your environment related topic under your GS syllabus 3. This article briefly, first of all, talks about the sources of pollution. So one is the cooking that happens, next is the use of power plants, then industries, then stubble burning, construction, and vehicular pollution. So these are the important source of pollution when you talk about the North India or even elsewhere. These are the major and common sources of pollution. So whenever you may be asked to say what steps we must take to reduce pollution in air pollution in general, then you can just correlate with the sources of pollution, and once you think about the sources of pollution in your mind, you will also be able to provide solution to each one of them. So when you think like that from the point of view of the sources of pollution, you will never miss out any important dimension, because if you have covered the sources, you would definitely cover the measures to tackle them as well. So these are the important sources of pollution. After this article says that first we need to, if we talk about the way forward or a solution to this problem, the first thing to do is we need to upgrade our technology. Our technology in what? In various fields. For example, the fuel that we used earlier for cooking was mainly the firewood, or it was the cow dung. So these create a lot of pollution. So rather, we must now upgrade our technology in this, and we must go for more induction cooking, more other electronic appliances which can be used for cooking. Then we must also use LPG for cooking. So these are more cleaner and safer fuels for cooking, and they are less polluting compared to the traditional firewood and dung cakes. So this is one transformation that we need to do. Next is the power plants. So it says that the coal power plants, coal based, are extremely polluting. So we need to move towards more hydel power plants and solar power plants. So that is a necessary transition in the technology that we must do. Next is the fuel for the industries. So traditionally, fuels that were used was coal in the industries, and now we can make a shift towards gas, we can make a shift towards hydrogen. So these are more cleaner sources of energy for the industries compared to the traditional fuels like coal. Next is again the vehicles. So rather than running the vehicles on petrol and diesel, we must move towards electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, vehicles that can again run on hydrogen, etc. So these are the kinds of transformations that we have to make in technology to adopt more cleaner and safer fuels and ways of doing our business. So in that, the role of the governments also become very important, because it is upon the government to incentivize those activities that are less polluting and also tax more those activities that are more polluting. So in this article talks about the pollution fee. So if the government is talking about introducing something like a pollution fee, then it has to be introduced in the value chain at those places where the activities which can cause pollution are more concentrated, because it is always economical to introduce such taxes in activities where they are concentrated rather than where they are dispersed. So for example, if we have to disincentivize the production of plastic, then it is better to levy that plastic tax over the refineries where the plastic can be made as a byproduct. So in the refineries, it is better to levy the tax on production of plastic. But it is not possible to see every small local level people who are engaged in the manufacture of plastic. So every such unit cannot be seen, and you cannot tax that, and you cannot enforce, because the production may happen at the local level and it's very difficult to enforce also. So rather levy a plastic fee at the apex level, where at the refineries where the activity related to the plastic manufacturing is concentrated. Similarly, when we talk of taxing the fly ash production, or when we talk of taxing this amount of sulfur dioxide that is produced, it is better to tax that at the level of the coal power plants itself. So because again we cannot look into the various tiny activities that happens at the local level and to measure how much of fly ash they are generating. It's always better to tax where something is generated, or a pollutant is generated, or a pollutant is produced at a more concentrated levels. So in the case of fly ash or sulfur dioxide, we can as well tax the coal based power plants themselves. So this is the way forward that this article is offering. Now we have one last article which is on reigning in the Big Five, which is about the antitrust proceedings that are happening, that now that have happened earlier against Microsoft, and now the European Commission has alleged Google that it is again misusing its dominant position in the market. So these are this antitrust proceedings against Google and Microsoft. This is one topic that we had to discuss today, but I'm stopping here because we have already discussed a lot today. So we will take this one topic plus tomorrow's newspaper tomorrow. So these were the other articles that were not important, or we have already dealt with this topic in detail previously. Then this is today's question, which is about RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. What are the merits and demerits of India joining this initiative, this free trade bloc? That is what you have to discuss. So this is a 15-marker question, and it has to be answered in 250 words. So do answer more and more such questions, and this is one such question because it's very recently in news and this deal has already been struck. So now India will have to enter afresh into negotiations if it wants to form a part of this bloc. So do attempt this question. So, and as many people as possible do write it. That's it for today. Thank you.